'Cause where I'm from, beef ain't squashed until somebody die. These weren't just lyrics in a Baton Rouge rapper's song. They were a chilling prophecy. On September 16, 2020, as darkness settled over Joyce Drive, 40-year-old Brenda Mullens stood behind her front door, 3 children inside, telling her ex-boyfriend she wanted nothing more to do with him. The man on the other side was a local rapper, Juice Bentley. Just months earlier, Bentley had fired multiple shots at his new girlfriend across town, and thankfully she wasn't hurt from the shots. Now, fresh from that attack and on the run, he arrived at Brenda's doorstep, his rage escalating from one woman to the next. "Beef don't squash unless it be a homicide," Bentley had rapped in his song Wartime, pointing guns directly at the camera. Now, as Brenda's voice echoed through the door, refusing him entry, those lyrics crystallized into deadly intent. The children were inside, and they later described their mother's firm voice not willing to open the door and the man's growing anger. Then came the sounds that would haunt them forever. Multiple gunshots tearing through the wooden door, their mother's body falling to the floor, and the rapid footsteps of a killer fleeing into the night. What the children couldn't have known was that their mother was the second victim in Bentley's rampage. The 24-year-old rapper, already wanted for home invasion and weapons charges, vanished from Baton Rouge, triggering a manhunt that stretched across multiple states. For nearly a month, as Brenda's family planned a funeral, Bentley remained in the shadows. His music videos filled with guns, threats, and violent imagery continued collecting views online. But what separated Davion Bentley from countless other rappers with violent lyrics was something investigators eventually discovered. Something that would send shockwaves through the music community and raise disturbing questions about a man whose lyrics became reality twice. Have you ever seen music lyrics foreshadow real violence? Drop your thoughts below, because what authorities discovered would reveal a connection between his music and murder that nobody saw coming. This is Crazy Dark Files. We have more crazy cases to bring to light. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an exposed case. Your support lends more voice to the deceased. Brenda Mullens never wanted to be a headline. At 40, her ambitions were beautifully ordinary, raising her 3 children in their modest Baton Rouge home on Joyce Drive, working her job with steady determination, and building the kind of life that rarely attracts attention but forms the backbone of every community. Friends described Brenda as the glue, the woman who organized neighborhood cookouts in summer, who kept extra school supplies for kids who needed them, who somehow managed to attend every school function despite working full-time. Her laughter, they said, could fill a room before she even entered it. She lived for those kids, recalled a neighbor who asked to remain anonymous. Everything, and I mean everything, was about giving them opportunities she never had. Those children, 2 boys and a girl, were Brenda's universe. Their artwork plastered her refrigerator, their sports schedules dictated her weekends, and their futures occupied her prayers. On her rare days off, you'd find Brenda at the park with them, or helping with homework at the kitchen table, or teaching them to cook the Creole recipes passed down from her grandmother. What made Brenda remarkable wasn't just her devotion to her children, but how she managed it all as a single mother. After leaving an unhealthy relationship years earlier, she had rebuilt her life brick by brick, finding stable housing, securing better employment, creating routines that gave her children stability despite limited resources. She was finally in a good place, said her sister during a tearful interview. Brenda had this new confidence. She was talking about going back to school, maybe getting her associate's degree. That newfound confidence extended to her personal boundaries. After years of allowing others to determine her worth, Brenda had begun to recognize her own value. She started saying no to relationships that didn't serve her. She began standing up for herself in ways both small and significant. It was this evolution, this quiet claiming of her own agency, that would ultimately put her in the crosshairs of a man who couldn't accept rejection. The cruel irony wasn't lost on those who knew her. Brenda Mullens, who had spent decades putting everyone else first, had finally begun prioritizing herself and her children's well-being. She had finally gathered the courage to close the door on toxic relationships, and it was through that very door that bullets would tear. on September 16th. The morning of that day had been unremarkable. Brenda had packed lunches, checked homework, kissed her children goodbye. She had no way of knowing that the boundaries she had worked so hard to establish, the very act of saying no to a man who felt entitled to her attention, would cost her everything. As night fell on Joyce Drive, Brenda Mullens was simply a mother at home with her children, unaware that her former boyfriend was about to transform her from a living, breathing woman into a statistic. Another victim whose life would be reduced to a few paragraphs in a news story. Another name on the endless list of women killed for saying no. While Brenda Mullens built a life of quiet dignity, Davion Bentley was crafting a very different legacy under the spotlight of Baton Rouge's vibrant hip-hop scene. At 24, Juice Bentley wasn't just another aspiring rapper. He was becoming a name that carried weight in Louisiana's music circles. His rise wasn't meteoric but methodical. Starting with homemade recordings in makeshift studios, Bentley gradually built a following through relentless self-promotion and an unflinching portrayal of street life. His tracks, raw, unpolished but undeniably authentic, resonated with listeners who recognized the harsh realities he described. The turning point came when established Baton Rouge rapper Kevin Gates, already a national figure, featured Bentley on a track. The collaboration elevated Juice from local curiosity to legitimate prospect. Suddenly, his videos garnered thousands instead of hundreds of views. Club promoters began adding him to lineups. His distinctive flow and unflinching lyrics caught attention beyond Louisiana's borders. But what set Bentley's music apart wasn't technical skill. It was the disturbing authenticity of his violent content. Unlike many rappers whose lyrics were performative, Bentley's tracks carried an unsettling conviction. I know him a die a real one. They thought I was duckin' till they thought that I had killed something, he rapped in one track, his eyes dead serious as he delivered the lines. In his song titled Wartime, perhaps his most chilling work, Bentley stared directly into the camera while declaring, "Beef don't squash unless it be a homicide," casually pointing firearms at the lens throughout the video. The imagery wasn't just provocative, it was predictive. What his growing fan base didn't realize was that Bentley's criminal record matched his lyrical content. By September 2020, he was already wanted on multiple charges: home invasion, illegal use of a weapon, felon in possession of a firearm, and criminal damage to property. Each charge represented not just a legal violation but a victim, someone who had already experienced Bentley's capacity for violence firsthand. Law enforcement had been searching for him even before the events of September 16th. His outstanding warrants painted a picture of a man spiraling deeper into violence, a man whose real-life actions were increasingly indistinguishable from his artistic persona. Those who knew both sides of Davion Bentley described a disturbing duality. In music industry settings, he could be charming, focused, ambitious, but those who encountered him in personal relationships saw flashes of something darker. A hair-stringer temper, a need for control, an inability to accept any perceived disrespect. The red flags were always there in his music, noted one local producer who had worked with Bentley. We just thought it was part of the image, you know. Nobody wanted to believe he meant that shit literally. But as events would soon prove, the line between Juice Bentley's art and Davion Bentley's actions had blurred beyond recognition. The man who rapped about solving problems with gunfire was about to transform those lyrics from entertainment into evidence. The 16-year age gap between Davion Bentley and Brenda Mullens raised eyebrows from the beginning. They met at a local venue where Bentley was performing, Brenda there with friends for a rare night out, Bentley commanding the stage with the confidence of a man destined for bigger things. "I pursued her relentlessly," recalled one of Brenda's friends. Flowers, constant texts, showing up at her workplace. It was flattering at first. This younger guy with some local fame choosing her. For Brenda, a hard-working mother who rarely received attention, Bentley's interest was intoxicating. Friends described the early days as a whirlwind, Bentley introducing her to his music world, bringing her backstage at shows, making her feel special in ways she hadn't experienced in years. But the dynamics shifted quickly. What began as attentiveness morphed into surveillance. What started as passion devolved into possession. He'd call her 20, 30 times if she didn't answer right away, said her sister. He'd question where she'd been, who she'd talked to. The jealousy was suffocating. Bentley began showing up unannounced at Brenda's home, sometimes in the middle of the night. He'd demand to check her phone, question her children about her whereabouts, and fly into rages over perceived slights. The relationship followed a classic cycle. Intense arguments followed by passionate reconciliations, threats followed by promises to change. For Brenda's children, Bentley's presence became a source of anxiety. They learned to read his moods, to make themselves scarce when his voice took on a certain edge. They watched their mothers shrink, becoming smaller and more cautious with each passing month. The breaking point came in late August 2020, when Bentley allegedly forced his way into Brenda's home during an argument, an incident that would later form the basis for one of his outstanding warrants. Something shifted in Brenda that night. Perhaps it was seeing the fear in her children's eyes, or perhaps it was the realization that the situation would only escalate. She told me, "I'm done. I can't do this anymore," her sister recounted. She said she'd rather be alone forever than live another day walking on eggshells. Brenda changed her locks. She blocked Bentley's number. She told friends and family she was finished with the relationship. She even began seeing someone new, a development that when Bentley discovered it sent him into a rage. In the weeks that followed, Bentley alternated between pleading for reconciliation and threatening retaliation. He began dating someone new himself, the woman who would become his first victim, but remained fixated on Brenda's rejection. What Brenda couldn't have known was that for men like Bentley, rejection isn't just disappointing, it's an unforgivable challenge to their sense of control. And control, once lost, would be reclaimed by any means necessary. September 16, 2020 began as an ordinary Wednesday in Baton Rouge. The late summer heat still clung to the city as evening approached, the kind of sticky Louisiana warmth that makes air conditioning a necessity rather than a luxury. For Brenda Mullens, it was a typical weeknight. Dinner with her children, homework at the kitchen table, the comfortable routine of a family winding down their day. Across town, Davion Bentley's day was taking a very different turn. Around 8:30 p.m., he arrived at his current girlfriend's apartment. What began as a conversation quickly escalated into an argument. Neighbors would later report hearing shouting, followed by several gunshots. Bentley fired multiple times at the woman before fleeing the scene, leaving her injured but alive, the first act in what would become a night of escalating violence. By 10:15 p.m., Bentley's car pulled onto Joyce Drive. Security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera captured his arrival. The determined stride, the hand repeatedly reaching toward his waistband, the glances over his shoulder. He approached Brenda's home with purpose, not passion. Inside, Brenda and her children were settling in for the night. Her youngest had just finished brushing his teeth. Her daughter was texting friends about school the next day. Her oldest son was already in bed with headphones on. It was the ordinary end to an ordinary day, until the pounding on their front door shattered the calm. "Mom, it's him," her daughter whispered, recognizing Bentley's voice immediately. Brenda instructed her children to go to their rooms and stay there. She approached the door but didn't open it, a decision that reflected her new boundaries, her commitment to keeping Bentley out of her life. Through the closed door, she spoke to him. "Davion, you need to leave. We're done. I've told you that." Her children, huddled in bedrooms, could hear Bentley's response, his voice rising, becoming more agitated with each exchange. He demanded to be let in. He accused her of seeing someone else. He reminded her of all he had done for her. "I just want to talk," he insisted, his voice momentarily softening in a tactic Brenda had seen before. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." "No," Brenda replied firmly. "It's late. The kids are trying to sleep. You need to go." What happened next unfolded in seconds, but would echo for years. At approximately 10:28 p.m., according to police reports, Bentley pulled out a handgun and fired multiple shots through the door. The bullets tore through the wooden barrier, striking Brenda multiple times in the chest and abdomen. Her children heard the gunshots, then the horrifying sound of their mother's body collapsing to the floor. Her oldest son, 17, rushed from his room to find Brenda bleeding heavily in the entryway. As he frantically called 911, his younger siblings emerged from their rooms, their screams piercing the night as they saw their mother's condition. Outside, security footage captured Bentley running back to his car and speeding away, tires screeching as he fled the scene, leaving behind 3 children desperately trying to save their mother's life. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. They found Brenda barely conscious, her children surrounding her, the oldest applying pressure to her wounds as the dispatcher had instructed. Paramedics worked quickly, stabilizing her enough for transport to a nearby hospital. But the damage was catastrophic. Despite emergency surgery, Brenda Mullens was pronounced dead at 11:42 p.m., just over an hour after Bentley had arrived at her door. As dawn broke on September 17th, 3 children faced a world without their mother, and Davian Bentley had vanished into the night. A manhunt now inevitable. The psychological profile of men who kill after rejection reveals a disturbing pattern. Unlike crimes motivated by jealousy or rage alone, rejection homicides stem from a fundamental belief that the victim has no right to end the relationship, that her autonomy is subordinate to the perpetrator's desire. When we examine Bentley's lyrics alongside his actions, we see perfect alignment. His music repeatedly frames violence as the solution to disrespect. The line, "Beef don't squash unless it be a homicide," isn't just artistic expression, it's his actual conflict resolution strategy. This intersection between artistic content and real-world violence raises uncomfortable questions about Bentley's music. Was he documenting his psychological reality rather than creating fictional narratives? Were listeners unknowingly consuming a manifesto rather than entertainment? What makes rejection killers particularly dangerous is their inability to perceive women as fully human, as beings with the right to make their own choices. In Bentley's worldview, Brenda's decision to end their relationship wasn't hers to make. Her rejection wasn't just disappointing, it was an offense demanding punishment. The double shooting, first his current girlfriend, then his ex, demonstrates his view of women as interchangeable possessions. When one relationship threatened his control, he attempted to destroy that partner. When he couldn't regain control of Brenda, he eliminated her entirely. But what Bentley did next would shock even veteran detectives. As authorities began processing the crime scene on Joyce Drive, the killer wasn't fleeing in panic or remorse. Instead, he was making a calculated move that would reveal just how long he'd been planning his escape, and just how confident he was that he'd never face consequences for Brenda's murder. As dawn broke over Baton Rouge on September 17th, Davian Bentley was already hundreds of miles away. While investigators processed the crime scene on Joyce Drive, while Brenda's children were placed with relatives, while her body underwent autopsy, Bentley was executing what appeared to be a pre-planned escape route. This wasn't a panicked flight, explained a BRPD Homicide Division spokesperson. The evidence suggests Bentley had prepared for the possibility he might need to disappear quickly. The first 48 hours of any manhunt are critical, but Bentley's head start complicated matters significantly. By the time authorities issued an arrest warrant for first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, illegal use of a weapon, and felon in possession of a firearm, their suspect had vanished from Louisiana entirely. Investigators faced multiple challenges simultaneously. They needed to process 2 separate crime scenes, the location where Bentley shot his current girlfriend and Brenda's home. They needed to interview traumatized witnesses, including 3 children who had just lost their mother, and they needed to track a suspect who had connections throughout the South. Law enforcement started with his known associates, fellow musicians, family members, anyone who might be harboring him. But Bentley was careful, avoiding contact with anyone who might be under surveillance. What Bentley didn't anticipate was how quickly his case would capture public attention. As details emerged about the double shooting, particularly the fact that children had witnessed their mother's murder, tips began flooding in. Bentley's status as a local rapper meant his face was recognizable, his music videos providing investigators with clear images to distribute nationwide. The investigation gained momentum when digital evidence suggested Bentley had been researching routes to Colorado in the weeks before the murders. This wasn't a spontaneous destination, but a calculated choice. A state far from Louisiana, where he had few known connections. Authorities immediately coordinated with law enforcement in Denver. They suspected he might be using public transportation to avoid the tracking issues associated with personal vehicles. For nearly a month, Bentley remained ghost-like, occasionally appearing on security cameras but vanishing before authorities could respond. He avoided using credit cards or phones linked to his identity. He stayed away from areas where facial recognition might flag him. He demonstrated the kind of evasion tactics that suggested this wasn't his first time avoiding law enforcement. But no fugitive can remain invisible forever. On October 12th, nearly a month after Brenda's murder, Bentley was located in Denver, Colorado. The precise tip that led to his discovery wasn't disclosed by authorities, but after 26 days on the run, his time as a fugitive was about to end. What state are you watching from? Would this case have been handled differently there? Drop a comment below, because the way different jurisdictions handle domestic violence cases can literally be a matter of life and death. As U.S. Marshals closed in on his location, the killer who had evaded capture for nearly a month was about to discover that his lyrics about dying a real one would be put to the test. As U.S. Marshals surrounded the nondescript motel on Denver's outskirts, they prepared for a potentially violent confrontation. Bentley's lyrics about going out shooting was going to play out for real. What Bentley didn't realize was that his capture hinged on a twist of irony so perfect it seemed almost scripted. The very music that had built his reputation had become the digital breadcrumb trail leading authorities directly to him. While Bentley had been careful to avoid using his phone or credit cards, he couldn't resist checking the performance of his music videos online. Each time he logged into streaming platforms to monitor his view counts, to see if his notoriety was growing, he left digital fingerprints. These brief connections from various Denver IP addresses allowed cyber analysts to gradually narrow his location. He thought he was being careful, noted one law enforcement source, but his ego created a pattern we could track. The final piece fell into place when Bentley made his most critical mistake. Believing himself safely anonymous in Colorado, he recorded a new verse on his laptop, lyrics that referenced Brenda's murder and his escape from Louisiana. He never published this recording, but the file's metadata contained geolocation information that, when combined with other digital evidence, pinpointed his location to within several blocks. As tactical teams took position around the motel on October 12th, they faced a critical decision: how to approach a suspect who had already demonstrated his willingness to shoot through doors to kill. The potential for a deadly standoff loomed large. Inside room 117, Bentley was unaware that his digital footprint had betrayed him. He had spent the day, as he had many others during his month on the run, moving between his room and nearby convenience stores, keeping his head down, planning his next move. He believed himself invisible, a ghost who had successfully outmaneuvered the system. The tactical team leader gave the signal. Officers approached from multiple angles, using the motel's layout to their advantage. They had one chance to surprise him before the situation could escalate into a firefight. As an officer positioned himself outside Bentley's door, the parallel was lost on no one. Another door, another moment of reckoning. But unlike the door on Joyce Drive, what happened next would determine whether justice for Brenda Mullens would ever be possible. The officer raised his fist to knock, the team tensed, weapons ready. Inside, Bentley heard a sound at his door. He reached for something beside him on the bed. The standoff that law enforcement had prepared for never materialized. When tactical teams breached Bentley's motel room, they found him reaching not for a weapon, but for his phone, perhaps to record what he thought would be his final moments. The man who had rapped about going out in a blaze of glory surrendered without resistance, his bravado evaporating in the face of overwhelming force. He just put his hands up, recalled one officer present at the arrest. All that talk about dying a real one, In the end, he didn't want to die at all. Bentley was taken into custody without incident on October 12, 2020, exactly 26 days after he had fired the shots that killed Brenda Mullens. The rapper, who had evaded authorities across state lines, who had believed himself untouchable, now faced the reality of handcuffs and a cell. The extradition process began immediately. While Colorado authorities processed Bentley, Louisiana prosecutors prepared the substantial case against him. The charges were extensive: first-degree murder for Brenda's death, attempted first-degree murder for the shooting of his other girlfriend, multiple counts of illegal use of a weapon, and felon in possession of a firearm. Additionally, his outstanding warrants for home invasion and criminal damage to property remained active. Bentley was returned to Baton Rouge in late October, his arrival marked by media attention that transformed the local rapper into a nationally recognized figure. Though not for his music. His mugshot, not his album cover, became his most widely circulated image. The legal proceedings moved with the deliberate pace characteristic of capital cases. Bentley's public defender initially explored an insanity defense, suggesting that his violent lyrics indicated mental instability rather than criminal intent. This strategy collapsed when psychological evaluations determined Bentley was fully aware of his actions and their consequences. As the case progressed toward trial, prosecutors assembled a devastating array of evidence. Ballistics matching the bullets from both shootings to the same weapon, cell phone records tracking Bentley's movements, security footage capturing his arrival at Brenda's home, and the heartbreaking testimony of children who had heard their mother's final moments. The trial began in early 2022, with Bentley facing a jury of his peers. His demeanor in court struck many observers. Gone was the aggressive persona from his videos, replaced by a subdued figure in dress clothes who barely resembled the man who had once pointed guns at cameras. The prosecution's case was methodical and overwhelming. They presented Bentley not as an artist whose art mirrored life, but as a calculating killer who had used his artistic persona as cover for escalating violence. His lyrics weren't expressions of fictional scenarios, but declarations of his actual intentions. After just 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The charge reduction from first-degree murder reflected the jury's conclusion that while Bentley had absolutely intended to kill Brenda, the crime hadn't been planned far in advance. The sentencing phase was brief. Given the severity of the crime and Bentley's prior record, the judge showed no leniency. Davion Juice Bentley was sentenced to life imprisonment at hard labor without the possibility of parole, probation, or suspension of sentence. As he was led from the courtroom, Bentley finally spoke, not in rhymes, but in a barely audible whisper: "I'm sorry." Whether this represented genuine remorse or simply regret at being caught remains known only to him. The tragedy of Brenda Mullens' murder extends beyond one family's loss. It illuminates patterns that might help others recognize danger before it turns deadly. There were several warning signs that were present in Bentley's behavior long before he pulled the trigger. His excessive jealousy, monitoring of Brenda's whereabouts, isolation tactics, and rapid escalation from verbal to physical intimidation all represented classic red flags. Perhaps most telling was his inability to accept the relationship's end, a factor present in nearly 75% of intimate partner homicides. The case also raises uncomfortable questions about artistic expression. While most musicians who incorporate violent themes in their work never act on those impulses, Bentley represents a disturbing exception, someone whose art wasn't separate from his intentions, but a blueprint for them. We really need to distinguish between artistic persona and genuine threat. Bentley's lyrics weren't metaphorical or fictional. They were autobiographical statements of purpose disguised as entertainment. Perhaps the most important lesson from Brenda's case is how rejection violence reflects broader societal attitudes about entitlement and control. When men like Bentley view women as possessions rather than autonomous beings, rejection becomes not just disappointing but unacceptable, a challenge to be answered with force. For Brenda Mullens' family, justice arrived in the form of a life sentence. Cold comfort for 3 children who lost their mother to senseless violence. Her sister now raises the children, trying to preserve Brenda's memory while helping them process trauma no child should experience. They still have nightmares, she shared in a rare interview. The youngest asks when Mom is coming home. The oldest blames himself for not protecting her. These aren't wounds that heal quickly. In Baton Rouge, Brenda's case has catalyzed change. Local law enforcement has implemented enhanced protocols for domestic violence calls, recognizing that previous incidents, like Bentley's home invasion charge, often predict escalation. The district attorney's office has created a specialized unit focused on high-risk domestic violence cases, intervening before situations turn deadly. Bentley's music has largely disappeared from streaming platforms, though occasional uploads appear from supporters who separate the art from the artist, a distinction Brenda's family finds impossible to make. His case has become a cautionary tale in discussions about artistic responsibility and the glorification of violence. For the children who heard their mother's final moments through a door pierced by bullets, the legacy of September 16, 2020 continues to unfold. They are survivors navigating a world permanently altered by one man's refusal to accept rejection. A world where their mother exists only in photographs and memories. What other cases have you seen where art predicted reality? Comment below and subscribe for more Crazy Dark Files investigations, where we examine not just what happened, but why, and how similar tragedies might be prevented.